What is strategy? That is the question that we endeavor to answer today. And the hope is that at the end of this video, we'll move from a vague, buzzwordy, fuzzy type of view of strategy as any sort of plan that one might deploy in their personal or professional life to a more simple and pragmatic definition of strategy that will, of course, prove useful to you in your personal and professional life, but will also act as a sound foundation for a lot of what we'll delve into on this channel going forward. But before we get into the nitty-gritties of what strategy is, I've never engaged with you in this way before. You've never engaged with me through this medium, and as is characteristic of such first times, you're probably asking yourself, what is this? What are we? So it's only right that I begin by introducing myself and this channel, what it aims to do, and where those two things meet. So I'm Kabo, and over the past few years, I've had the privilege of working as a strategy consultant, advising primarily quite a number of public sector or state entities in South Africa. And in addition to this, I'm a deep patriot who wants to see nothing less than the fulfillment of the vision of a South Africa that serves and provides a solid foundation for the thriving of all of its citizens. And over the years, it's become clear to me that for such a vision to be fulfilled, it is a necessity that there's a good-willed and proactive effort by public servants and citizens as a whole to make this vision a reality. And in order for the citizenry to act in a well-informed manner toward making this vision a reality, I think there needs to be, number one, a better understanding of the direction that the country is headed in, or the country's strategy. So what is the North Star? What has the government articulated as what our country is doing and where we're headed? That's number two. And I think public servants and citizens in general also need a sound view of the strengths and weaknesses in our implementation of these strategies and our progressing towards the realization of these strategies that public sector or government has set out for us. And finally, I think everyone in their own personalized way needs to, over time, have some sort of personal view of how they, in whatever small or large way they can, are able to contribute towards the fulfillment of the vision of a fair and prosperous South Africa for all, as it was articulated as far back as 1955, and I'm sure before that, in the Freedom Charter, more recently at the dawn of our democracy in the Constitution, and even more recently in the National Development Plan. And towards this channel, Strat for G's, aims to do three main things, which I've already kind of vaguely hinted at. Number one, illuminates or crystallize the strategy and plans that our government has put in place for our country. What is the North Star? What direction are we headed in? We want to articulate that in a palatable way for everyone. Number two, shine a light on the strengths and weaknesses in our implementation of these strategies. And number three, contribute towards the development of a better informed public service and citizenry that knows how they can contribute toward the realization of a fair and prosperous South Africa for all. So that's me, that's this channel, that's what we aim to do. And with that said, let's get into the meat of this video here today. What is strategy? As we move through the definition of strategy, I'll begin with a breakdown of the historical context and definition of strategy, and then we'll move towards an understanding of how strategy is defined in our modern day and age. And importantly, I think we should also then differentiate between strategy as it applies in the public sector and in the private sector. So, historically, strategy has military roots. In fact, the word strategy itself is derived from the Greek word strategos. I'm not sure if that's how it's pronounced. I like to think it's pronounced in that way, but let's go with strategos. And the word strategos can be translated to mean the art of the general. And the word strategos by the Greeks was used as far back as 500 BC to refer to a general or military leader who had the responsibility of developing a military strategy and executing the military strategy toward winning a war. And around this time, or in the same period of about 500 BC, the concepts of strategy were being articulated and used by warring tribes in Asia. And within this period, a seminal text within strategic warfare arose. And this was The Art of Warfare by the individual or group of people known as Sun Tzu. And in The Art of War, which stemmed from Asia, Sun Tzu defines strategy as an approach to war that, number one, minimizes conflict, and number two, maximizes the likelihood of winning the war through a sound understanding of one's internal military capability, the capabilities of the enemy, as well as the environment within which one's military and the enemy's military will engage. So since 500 BC and the 2,000 years that followed that, strategy was primarily the work of military generals and leaders who, with a high-level view of their internal capabilities and the capabilities of the enemy as well as the environment within which they'd engage, would come up with a high-level plan for how their military could win a war. But this understanding or use of strategy, or the use of strategy itself, kind of moved from the battlefield into the boardroom around the 1950s due to an increasing need to better manage larger organizations within the more complex and competitive economies of the time. And this is where we saw the movement of strategies, or the transition and retrofitting of strategic concepts from their use within military to win wars to their use within boardrooms to allow companies to effectively compete against other companies and win within their marketplace. Let me just move my presentation forward here. Now, with the kind of surface level appreciation of this story arc of strategy from its use in the military to its use in the boardroom, I think we're well positioned now to land on a simple and hopefully pragmatic definition of strategy. So from my experience and the research that I've done in this video and just my learnings from other people over time, I think a good definition of strategy is an organization's articulation of how it will use its limited resources to win within its environment. An organization's articulation of how it will use its limited resources to win within its environment. And as was the case back in when strategy was used primarily for military, in the modern day and age, a key element of strategy is its importance in allowing organizations to understand how they will win within their environment. I think it's important also to differentiate between strategy and how this definition of strategy might apply to the public sector and the private sector. Private sector being more profit and competition driven, and public sector being more impact driven. A thought leader within modern business strategy, Michael Porter, centers the idea of strategy around an organization needing to come up with a unique value proposition that can allow it to set itself apart from its competitors, and by so doing, win within the marketplace. This definition of strategy is very applicable to the private sector, where it's essential that companies, you start your company, the company needs to create value that ideally would be unique, and through creating value, they can set themselves apart from their competitors and establish a sustained competitive advantage, which would allow them to, over time, establish a favorable market position. So winning and how winning is defined within the private sector very much has to do with competing and winning within the marketplace. But how is winning defined in the public sector? In the public sector, winning is a bit less about outcompeting others and more about achieving defined impacts and fulfilling certain mandates through effective service delivery. And in public sector, although service delivery is a primary part of what the government aims to do and what strategies aim for it to do, another key thing that the government aims to do is to identify areas where a country might have a competitive advantage and create a conducive environment for those industries where the the country might have a competitive advantage to thrive and advance and ultimately produce economic value. So within public sector, winning a bit less about competition and profitability, more about service delivery and achieving impacts and fulfilling mandates. But there's also within our global modern economy the element of identifying where a country can be competitive economically and fostering or cultivating and enabling the development of those industries. And these slightly different definitions of what winning is and what a strategy might be in the private sector and the public sector also lead to slight differences in how the progress towards the achievement of strategy or the progress towards winning is measured in private sector and public sector. In private sector, if a company is winning and effectively outcompeting the other players in the marketplace, then their success can be measured through looking at their profitability and their market share, among a lot of other measures. And in public sector, in South Africa in particular, whether a state-owned entity or particular segment of government is fulfilling their strategy and winning can be measured by their achievement or progress to achieving certain defined outcomes. And just for the sake of your context and understanding, in public sector in South Africa, so across the government, whether it be national government level or in the different ministries, or state-owned entities, provincial, municipal level, all these different organizations, we'll call them within government, they define a high-level win for themselves that they aim to achieve in the long term, and that's the impact. And towards achieving this impact, they define more measurable and more short to medium term outcomes that they want to achieve. And through measuring the achievement or progress towards these outcomes, they can kind of determine how close they are to achieving the high level impact that they set out to achieve. So for example, just off the top, this is not a real example, but the Department of Basic Education might want to provide quality and free basic education to all young South Africans. That might be the high level impact. And then outcomes towards achieving this that they maybe would want to achieve and track their progress toward every year or between 1 and 5 years might be, number one, build 500 schools in the identified priority districts in South Africa. Number two might be train and deploy 10,000 young teachers across the country. And number three might be achieve a year-on-year pass rate within basic education of 85%. And by measuring the progress towards achieving those outcomes, they can determine the progress towards achieving the higher level impact. Now, strategy we've defined at a high level as an articulation of how an organization will use its limited resources to win within its environment. But beyond this articulation of strategy at this high level, strategy manifests itself on a day-to-day basis in the decision-making of middle management, lower level management, and sometimes operation level staff in an organization, because strategy helps an organization understand it helps an organization define what it wants to do, what it will do, and what it will not do. So for example, an airline, the primary strategy might be to be the leading low-cost carrier, low-cost airline in South Africa. That might be their high-level strategy. Leading low-cost carrier, leading low-cost airline in South Africa. And this will guide some of the decisions that middle and lower management will make on a day-to-day basis. For example, procurement decisions. If you have two vendors or suppliers who might provide you with chicken for your plane, and the quality difference in their product is not too different. It's not too different. And maybe supplier one wants to provide you with chicken for 40 Rand per kg, and supplier two wants to provide you with chicken for 35 Rand per kg. Because your strategy says you want to be low cost, your decision of which chicken you're going to use is going to be the one that allows you to achieve the strategy and intention to be low cost. So of course you'd go for the 35 Rand per kg chicken. So that is how we define strategy, and how one might look at strategy and how its definition differs within public and private sector. In summary, strategy has its roots within the military, where a general or military leader, with the view of an army's internal capabilities, the capabilities of the enemy, and the environment within which they would do battle, would come up with a high-level plan that would allow them to win. In our modern day and age, and particularly within public sector, our generals are the leaders in government and state entities. The enemies that we face are unemployment, service delivery and infrastructure challenges, increasing inequality, and corruption and criminal elements within the state. And a winning strategy is one that tells us how we will overcome these challenges and win as a country. So, how have the different organs of state articulated our approach to overcoming these various challenges? Where can one find this articulation of these strategies by public sector organs? How can one monitor and track the progress towards the successful implementation of these strategies? What are the challenges and strengths in the implementation of these strategies? And what role can we as public servants and informed citizens play in contributing towards the effective delivery on these strategies? Those are some of the questions that we aim to answer on this channel, as I'm sure you figured by now. But until then, let's all continue to proactively show up in our lives, for ourselves, for our families, for our communities, for the country, exclamation mark, for the country, exclamation mark, for the country, for the continent, and ultimately for the world, so that we can all play our part in helping us win. Until next time, thank you for your attention. Sharp, sharp.